Hello. So today I want to talk about, I'll link the video below. I got sent this from someone in the comments, thank you very much, to have a look at Jordan Peterson's conceptions of postmodernism and Marxism, and he's trying to lay out an argument that political correctness is a result of postmodernism and Marxism / neo-Marxism, and that's how he lays out his own argument. That's how he says he's going to argue his own argument. So what he plans to do, he sets it out at the start, is address postmodernism's false claims, then address Marxism's false claims, and then address how each of these, their paradoxical but joint positioning, creates political correctness, and why that is essentially wrong. That's what he says he will do in his argument. Okay? Now, the thing is, I'm going to preface this with the fact that I really respect Jordan Peterson as an evolutionary psychologist. He's very good in terms of looking at religious symbology and stuff as well, in terms of archetypes and sort of Jung's shadow self and stuff. He's very good at that. He's very good at psychology, very good, and you know that he's an expert in his field, but he is an expert in his field. He is not an expert in all fields, and certainly not in sociology. So I'd like to explain why the argument that he puts forward is completely flawed. This might never come out, or it might come out in a few months' time when I'm able to actually do editing and stuff, to have it up on screen and whatnot, because I think it would probably be useful, just so that you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about it, because I do think it would be better to really go sort of frame by frame, because there is a few. Okay, I'll start laying it out. So I've told you what he proposed his central argument, how he proposed his argument would go, and I really appreciate that kind of logical layout. I always do, particularly when it comes to academic debate. Obviously, I mean, it just makes sense. Be clear in what you're laying out. Now, this might be a separate video. I might make another video on this, but I just want to make a side note that I think where the left virtue signals, the right logic signals, and it's dangerous, because just because he says he's being logical doesn't mean he is being logical, and I will explain why he's not being logical within this argument. The argument actually breaks down halfway through his performance, and I would call it that. So his argument really breaks down halfway through, and it makes no sense at all. And I noticed this when he was talking on Joe Rogan. He starts talking from a standpoint of evolutionary biology. Usually he starts using evolution and evolutionary sciences to back up his points. But evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology is it's important, but it's one very small aspect of a sociological problem or a sociological theory, and I do feel that that's where he's going wrong a lot. I think he doesn't understand sociological theory, and he's trying to reduce it to something that it just can't be reduced to. Don't get me wrong, I think the people on the left do that as well, and I think that's probably the reason we're in the position that we're in. But yeah, I just want to, hopefully you can go and have a watch of the video first. If I might upload this and then try and redo it another time, but maybe you could go and have a look at the video, and then I'll explain why these things are wrong. So he lays out very neatly for us that the central claim of postmodernism that he is arguing against is that there's an infinite number of perceptions of any phenomena. For example, what Marxism means, okay? There are an infinite number of perceptions of what that could mean to any person, which I think I kind of supported that argument yesterday with a previous video. I don't think anyone knows what words actually mean anymore. It can be the same word, and every person that I'll talk to has a completely different definition of what that means. Now, obviously, I've chosen to focus on language there. That, I mean, we can go into why in a bit. So that's the central claim that he's refuting, apparently. He wants to go against that. So he goes on to explain his understanding of this central claim. Okay. Oh, I don't know why I did that. It is a central claim. It is the most central claim, probably, of postmodernism. I don't know why I did that. It definitely is the central claim. His characterization of what that central claim is completely wrong, though, and that's made clear from. Come on, bro. That's made clear. Sorry, I had a bug on my leg. That is made clear from what he calls so this central claim. Oh, why do I keep doing that? So the central claim, he then reconstitutes as an assault on any interpretation of anything, and he goes one further and claims that postmodernists, theorists, claim that no interpretation of the world should be a privileged interpretation. Straight away, that is wrong. That's not what postmodernists do. Postmodernists explain why we cannot have any central, why there in reality can be no one central narrative that works for everyone, because there never can be, right? Because we've all had different past history, genetics, understandings of the world, experiences of the world, people around us. Like, we've all had all of those different things that mean that anything that we come across is just our perception of that thing. I will never have the same perception of even this video as what you're having of it, right? And forget me being in the video, anyone watching this video will have a completely different perception of me, of this video, of what I'm saying, completely, because everyone's bringing their own stuff to it, right? Everyone's bringing all of their history and all of their learned stuff from their whole life to everything that they do. That's all postmodernists are saying. They're not saying that this is a way to do things. They're just explaining how the world already is. Marxism doesn't do that, obviously. Well, it does to some extent, but it also goes to, it's also a normative theory. So it tries to, why do I keep doing this? Inappropriately. So it's a normative theory, and a normative theory means that that's how they think things should be too. So they're setting out a way of how the world should be. Postmodernist theory isn't that. It's not laying out a way of how you should be. It's just explaining why the world is breaking apart. That's all. It's not trying to tell you how to live at all. At all. And that is his central claim, okay? Which is just completely wrong. And then he goes on to explain why there are only so many viable interpretations, okay? And I want to use his own argument against him here. So he lays out, rightly so, don't get me wrong, that there are constraints on a realistic interpretation of the world, or a realistic perception of the world. You've got death and suffering, which he argues should restrain your understanding of the world to an extent that you try not to die or suffer, right? This point straight away shows that he doesn't understand postmodernism and what he's arguing against. And I'll take death, for example. I have an idea of what death means for me. I'm not scared of it. I'm absolutely okay with dying, right? Because I believe in reincarnation. I don't believe that my energy just stops. And to be honest, even if it did, I wouldn't know about it, so I'm not scared, right? I'm fine with it. And that's my particular perception of death. There are all across the world other ideas of what death actually means, and in many cultures death doesn't occur like as simply as we might like to imagine. I'm going to use an example from Africa, from anthropology, that I know. As a guy in a tribe, he died, but he didn't actually die, right? He or who knows, this is the question, right? He died, but his physical body came back. It revived, right? But his whole tribe had already done all the funeral rites and stuff like that, so they were like, oh no, you're like a witch or something. You can't be that person because we've done all the rites, so that's it, it's done. You can't be that person anymore. So it didn't matter what about his own perception of his death. It didn't matter. It didn't matter because the village said, no, you're dead, bruv. Like, you're not coming back because you're obviously like an evil spirit in his body. We did all the stuff, so you have to be dead. Right? So I think that speaks to the idea that the world is too complex and has infinite numbers of perceptions of particular phenomenon. That's one. Suffering. What suffering is to different people, completely different. That is the point of postmodernism. It's not trying to say you should or shouldn't be doing anything. It's not a normative theory. It's just explaining what happens in the world. Jordan Peterson thinks from a he tries to fix the world. That's what he's trying to do all the time. Postmodernism does not try to do that. It's just explaining why we can't communicate with each other anymore, and all of those kind of things. It's explaining why images take on so many different meanings. You know, like a MAGA hat. To some people, that means liberation for America. That's hope. For some people, it means racism. It means slavery. It means all of those things. That's all postmodernism's trying to say. That's all it's saying. It's just that. And then he goes on to explain that you need to cooperate with other people. You need to be sociable in some sense. You want to be able to compete with other humans. He threw that in there with absolutely nothing to back that up. Nothing. There's no evidence that we always want to compete. That we want to compete. We might want to play puzzles. We might want to play games. That doesn't mean that we want to compete in a life or death situation with other humans. I'm not sure that that's what he's saying either, but that's my point. He didn't substantiate anything of what he was saying there. He just quickly said it and moved on. And you have to have ambitions and realistic compromises as to what you can actually achieve. He's saying all of these things apparently in refutation of the central claim that there are infinite numbers of perceptions of any phenomena in the world. All he's listed is various elements that will create numerous different interpretations of the world. Imagine that. One person's idea of death, suffering, cooperation, being sociable, being competing, ambitions, realistic compromises, all of that. For each person, if you combine all of those things, for each person it's going to be wildly different and going to wildly change their perception of the world around them. That's what postmodernism is saying. Nothing more, nothing less. Maybe more and maybe less, but the central claim is exactly that, and he's not refuted it so far with anything that he's put forward. Then he quickly jumps to Piaget and Kant. And honestly, I went over this section 10 times and I looked up both of the things that he was referring to here, both Piaget and Kant's maxims. And A, they have nothing to do with what he said previously. B, they're based in psychology and philosophy. And C, he's not actually refuted the central claim yet with anything that he said. Just throwing in something that Kant has said does not support your argument, but he acts as if it does. The Kant quote, which he didn't even quote, this is another thing that really annoys me. You can't quote two people and then within referring to them go, or it was something along those lines. You can't do that in the middle of an academic argument. You can't. Well, it was something along them lines. That's what he does. So you can't do that. You also can't refute a sociological theory with philosophical and psychological arguments, because they're not equitable. They just don't. You can in some regards, but not in the way he's doing it. So and then that's it. He concludes that section as having refuted the central argument of postmodernism. He says that he's argued that the infinite number of interpretations of the world are constrained by realistic interpretations of the world. They're not. That's not constraint. It just absolutely shows why there are all he listed supports the argument that there are infinite number of interpretations of the world. He didn't refute anything, and he would have known that if he had actually understood the arguments that he was trying to argue against. So he goes on to, now this is where it really gets very messy, and part of me does wonder, I don't know if this is really horrible to say, but part of me does wonder if what happened on stage here speaks to his mental breakdown a little bit, because here he gets a little bit it gets completely nonsensical, completely, and he really shows that actually what he's arguing against is something not found in postmodernism or Marxism, and therefore his argument that political correctness comes from that is completely false. So he goes on anyway to explain that Marxism is a meta-narrative which creates a dichotomy of oppressor and oppressed. Okay? That is an oversimplification of Marxism completely. Because actually Marxism explains how the system keeps all people unfree, whether you are the capitalist or the worker. We are all unfree within this system because of the restraints that are put on us from simply being that thing that we are within the system that we're in. So this dichotomy between oppressor and oppressed, again, is completely false. It's a complete reduction of Marxist theory, and again shows that he doesn't actually know. Sorry, wasp. I think, but it shows that he doesn't actually know what he's arguing against at all. He points out that Marxism and postmodernism doesn't go together. He explains that postmodernism doesn't support that there are any meta-narratives that can work or explain anyone's life completely. And he basically rewrites history in the next bit, and he claims that postmodernism emerged out of a Marxist framework, and that they kept the framework of oppressor-oppressed, but switched it to identity groups with privilege and not. None of that happened. None of that has happened in theory. Within academic debate, none of that has happened. It may have been... These things may have been taken on and reconstituted by a largely liberal, white, middle class group of people who have then put their own guilt and whatever, and want it, or even wanting to not feel guilty and wanting to be the opposite, trying to find a way of not being the oppressor. Some of that may have happened by political groups and even individuals within academia who don't actually understand what they're talking about. I can certainly see that those things have happened elsewhere. I can see that misunderstandings of postmodernism and misunderstandings of Marxism have been perpetuated, and people are professing to be whatever when they're not. But none of this, all of the rest of what he says is a complete mischaracterization of both postmodernism, radicalism, like all three, postmodernism, radicalism and Marxism. He chucks all three into the same thing and then starts arguing against claims of theirs that have never been claimed. I'm just going to pause this because my phone only lets me record videos for so long, and I'll come back with a part 2. But yeah.